The blood drained from Genevieve Vaughn's face as she stood frozen in the doorway of the Silver Spur Saloon, watching her fiancé, Thomas Henderson, press his lips against the painted mouth of a woman who was decidedly not her. It was April 1883, and Circleville, Utah was supposed to be the place where she would finally settle down after years of moving from town to town with her merchant father, but instead it had become the location of her greatest humiliation. The wedding was scheduled for exactly 7 days from now. The church already decorated with white ribbons her mother had painstakingly tied, the dress hanging in her bedroom like a ghost of the future that would never come to pass. She stumbled backward before either of them could see her, her hand clutching the doorframe as nausea rolled through her stomach in waves that threatened to bring up the modest lunch she had eaten hours earlier. The street outside was busy with afternoon traffic, wagons rolling past and kicking up dust that settled on her dark blue traveling dress, but she barely noticed any of it. Her vision had narrowed to a pinpoint, her breathing coming in short gasps that made her corset feel tighter than it ever had before. "Miss Vaughn, are you all right?" A deep voice cut through the fog of her shock, and she looked up to find herself staring into the concerned face of a tall man wearing a worn cowboy hat and dusty chaps. His eyes were a striking shade of hazel that seemed to see right through her carefully maintained composure, and there was genuine worry etched into the weathered lines around his mouth. "I am perfectly fine," she lied, her voice sounding hollow even to her own ears. She tried to step around him, but her knees buckled unexpectedly, and his strong hands caught her elbows before she could hit the wooden planks of the sidewalk. "You are not fine at all," he said firmly, guiding her toward a bench outside the general store. "Sit down before you fall down." Genevieve wanted to argue, wanted to maintain the dignity that had been drilled into her since childhood, but her body betrayed her by collapsing onto the bench with all the grace of a dropped sack of flour. She pressed her hands to her face, trying desperately to hold back the tears that burned behind her eyelids like hot coals. "Did someone hurt you?" the cowboy asked, crouching down so he could look up at her face. "Should I fetch the sheriff?" "No," she managed to choke out. "No sheriff, I saw something I was not meant to see." Understanding flickered across his features, followed by a flash of anger that was not directed at her. "Somebody's a fool," he said quietly. "Anybody who would hurt a lady like you is not worth the dirt on your shoes." She finally looked at him properly, taking in the strong jaw covered with several days' worth of stubble, the broad shoulders, and the way his entire bearing spoke of a man who was comfortable in his own skin. There was something inherently trustworthy about him, something that made her want to pour out the entire sordid story even though she had only just met him. "My fiancé," she whispered, the word tasting bitter on her tongue. "I just watched him kissing another woman. The wedding is in 7 days." The cowboy's jaw tightened, and he stood up to his full height, which she estimated to be well over 6 feet. "Show me which man, and I will make sure he understands what he has thrown away." "Violence would not solve anything," Genevieve said, though part of her thrilled at the idea of someone defending her honor. "It would only make everything worse." "Maybe," he conceded, settling onto the bench beside her with a respectful distance between them, "but it sure would feel satisfying." He pulled off his hat and ran a hand through dark hair that was slightly too long, giving him a roguish appearance. "Name is Quinn Anderson. I work at the Double R Ranch about 5 miles outside of town." "Genevieve Vaughn," she replied automatically, years of social training kicking in despite her emotional turmoil. "My father owns the Mercantile on Main Street." "I know," Quinn said with a small smile. "I have bought supplies there a few times." "You were always kind. even when I was covered in trail dust and probably smelled like cattle. She found herself returning his smile despite everything, remembering a tall cowboy who had always said please and thank you, who had once helped her reach a bolt of fabric on the top shelf without being asked. "I remember you," she admitted. "You bought peppermint sticks every time." "Guilty," he said, his smile widening. "Got a weakness for them." His expression sobered as he studied her face. "What are you going to do about the wedding? Call it off, obviously," Genevieve said, though saying the words out loud made them feel more real and therefore more painful. "I cannot marry a man who would betray me before we even spoke our vows. If he does this now, what would he do after we were married?" "You deserve a faithful man," Quinn said with such conviction that it made her chest ache. "You deserve someone who would rather cut off his own arm than hurt you. Do not settle for anything less than that." They sat in silence for a few moments, the sounds of the town washing over them like water. A dog barked somewhere nearby, and a woman called for her children to come inside for supper. Normal life continued all around them while Genevieve's entire world had just crumbled into pieces. "I should go home," she finally said, rising to her feet with more steadiness than she had felt a few minutes earlier. "My mother will be wondering where I am." Quinn stood as well, replacing his hat on his head. "May I walk you there, just to make sure you are all right?" She knew she should refuse, knew that being seen walking with another man when she was still technically engaged would cause talk, but she found herself nodding anyway. "That would be kind of you." They walked slowly through the streets of Circleville, past the whitewashed church where she was supposed to become Mrs. Thomas Henderson, past the schoolhouse where she had once dreamed of sending her future children. Quinn did not try to fill the silence with empty platitudes, and she was grateful for that. He simply walked beside her like a steady presence, solid and reassuring in a way that Thomas had never been. When they reached the neat two-story house behind the mercantile, Genevieve paused at the gate. "Thank you," she said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "You did not have to be kind to me, but you were." "Kindness does not cost anything," Quinn replied, his hazel eyes warm in the late afternoon sun. "If you need anything, anything at all, you can find me at the Double R. I mean that." She watched him walk away, his long strides eating up the distance, and felt something shift inside her chest. Then she squared her shoulders, lifted her chin, and went inside to face the music. Her mother was in the kitchen, flour dusting her apron as she rolled out dough for biscuits. Margaret Vaughn looked up with a smile that faded the moment she saw her daughter's face. "Genevieve, what happened?" "The wedding is off," Genevieve said baldly, deciding that directness was the only way to handle this. "I caught Thomas kissing another woman at the Silver Spur." The rolling pin clattered to the table as her mother's hands flew to her mouth. "Oh, my darling girl," she breathed, rushing around the table to pull Genevieve into a fierce embrace. "Oh, my sweet child." That was all it took for the tears to finally come. Great heaving sobs that shook Genevieve's entire body. Her mother held her through all of it, making soothing noises and stroking her hair like she had when Genevieve was small and had scraped her knee. When her father came home an hour later, he found them sitting at the kitchen table with cold tea and red eyes. Samuel Vaughn listened to the story with a face like thunder, his bushy eyebrows drawing together in a way that would have been comical under any other circumstances. "I will speak to Thomas and his family," he announced, his voice hard as granite. "The engagement is dissolved, and they will return every gift that has been given. He will not humiliate my daughter without consequences." The next 3 days passed in a blur of canceled plans and whispered gossip. Genevieve held her head high whenever she went out, refusing to let the town see her break, but it was exhausting. Thomas had the audacity to come to the house, claiming it had been a momentary lapse in judgment, that he loved her and wanted to make things right. She had shut the door in his face. On the fourth day after discovering the betrayal, Genevieve woke up feeling restless and confined. The house felt like a cage, and her mother's well-meaning hovering was making her want to scream. She dressed in her most practical riding habit, pinned her dark hair into a tight bun, and went to the stable where her mare Clover waited. The ride out of town was exactly what she needed, the wind against her face and the rhythm of Clover's hooves pounding out her frustrations on the hard, packed earth. She rode without any real destination in mind, following the road that led past various ranches and homesteads. She was so lost in her thoughts that she almost missed the turnoff with the weathered sign that read Double R Ranch. Before she could think better of it, she turned Clover down the drive. She was not sure what she was doing or what she hoped to accomplish, but something pulled her forward. The ranch house came into view, a sturdy structure of wood and stone that looked like it had been built to withstand anything nature could throw at it. There were several outbuildings, corrals full of cattle, and men working everywhere she looked. One of those men was Quinn, and he spotted her almost immediately. He handed the rope he had been holding to another cowboy and strode toward her, his face lighting up in a way that made her heart do a strange little flip. "Miss Vaughn," he called out, reaching up to help her dismount. His hands on her waist were strong and sure, and he set her on the ground as gently as if she were made of spun glass. "This is a surprise. I needed to get out of town," she admitted, suddenly feeling foolish. "I was riding and found myself here. I apologize for the intrusion." "No intrusion at all," Quinn assured her. "I am glad you came. Can I offer you some water, some lemonade? My boss's wife makes the best lemonade in 3 counties. "Lemonade sounds wonderful," Genevieve said gratefully, realizing how thirsty the ride had made her. Quinn led her toward the ranch house, where a plump woman with kind eyes welcomed them warmly. Mrs. Roberts, as she introduced herself, seemed to sense that Genevieve needed mothering, and she fussed over her with lemonade and fresh cookies while asking no prying questions. After the refreshments, Quinn offered to show her around the ranch, and Genevieve accepted eagerly. They walked through the property, Quinn explaining the operation with obvious pride in his work. He showed her the newest calves, wobbly-legged and curious, and introduced her to his own horse, a magnificent buckskin gelding named Ranger. "How long have you worked here?" Genevieve asked as they leaned against a corral fence, watching the horses mill about in the afternoon sun. 5 years now, Quinn replied. "Came here after my father passed. He was a rancher, too, up in Wyoming, but after he died there was not much keeping me there. Mr. Roberts gave me a job when I needed one, and I have been here ever since." "You like it?" She found herself genuinely curious about his life, about what made him tick. "I do," he said simply. "It is honest work, hard work but honest. I like knowing that what I do matters, that the cattle I help raise will feed families, that the horses I train will carry people where they need to go." He glanced at her sideways. "What about you? What do you want to do with your life?" It was a question no one had ever asked her before, and Genevieve had to think about her answer. "I am not sure anymore," she admitted. "I thought I knew. I thought I would marry Thomas and have children and run a household. But now that path is closed, and I find I do not know what other paths might exist." "There are always other paths," Quinn said quietly. "Sometimes the ones we do not plan are the ones that lead us where we are meant to be." They talked for hours, about everything and nothing. Quinn told her about growing up on a ranch, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about his mother who had died when he was 12, and how his father had done his best to raise him right. Genevieve found herself opening up in return, talking about her childhood, about moving from town to town, before her father finally saved enough to buy the mercantile, about her dreams and fears, and all the things she had never told anyone else. The sun was starting to sink toward the horizon when Genevieve finally realized how late it had gotten. "I should head back," she said reluctantly. "My parents will worry." "Let me ride with you," Quinn offered immediately. "It is not safe for a lady to ride alone at dusk." She wanted to protest that she could take care of herself, but the truth was that she wanted his company, wanted to extend this perfect afternoon just a little bit longer. So she agreed, and Quinn saddled Ranger while she mounted Clover. The ride back to town was peaceful, the two horses walking side by side while the sky turned shades of orange and pink overhead. They talked less on the return journey, but the silence was comfortable rather than awkward. When they reached the Vaughn house, Quinn dismounted and helped Genevieve down once again. This time his hands lingered on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary, and she found herself standing closer to him than propriety demanded. "Thank you for today," she said softly. "I needed it more than I knew." "Can I see you again?" Quinn asked, his voice hopeful but hesitant. "I know the timing is not ideal, and if you need space I will give it to you, but I would very much like to spend more time with you." Genevieve knew she should say no, knew that society would expect her to mourn her broken engagement for a respectable period of time before entertaining any other suitors. But standing there in the gathering dusk, looking up into Quinn's honest face, she found she did not care what society expected. "I would like that too," she said, and was rewarded with a smile that seemed to light him up from within. Over the following weeks, Quinn became a fixture in Genevieve's life. He would come into town on his days off, always bringing some small token with him. Wildflowers he had picked on the way, interesting rocks he thought she might like, once a particularly beautiful bird feather. They would walk together through the town, ignoring the gossips who whispered behind their hands, or ride out to pretty spots where they could talk for hours. Thomas tried to interfere several times, showing up at places where he knew Genevieve would be, trying to convince her to give him another chance. Each time, Quinn would appear like a protective shadow, not threatening but simply present, a silent reminder that Genevieve had moved on. One evening in late May, about 6 weeks after that fateful day at the Silver Spur, Quinn took Genevieve to a spot high in the hills outside of town. They spread a blanket on the grass and watched the stars come out one by one, scattered across the darkening sky like diamonds on velvet. "I need to tell you something," Quinn said, his voice serious in a way that made Genevieve's heart skip a beat. "I have been trying to find the right words, the right time, but I do not think there is such a thing." "You can tell me anything," Genevieve assured him, reaching out to place her hand over his where it rested on the blanket. "I am falling in love with you," Quinn said simply. "Actually, that is not quite right. I have already fallen." "I am in love with you, Genevieve Vaughn, and I do not know what to do about it because I know it is too soon. I know you need time to heal, but I cannot keep it inside anymore." Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she could not speak. Then she shifted closer to him, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "It should be too soon," she whispered. "By all rights, I should still be nursing a broken heart, but the truth is, I think my heart was not very attached to Thomas to begin with. I was marrying him because it was expected, because it was the next step, not because I truly loved him." She took a shaky breath. "And I am falling in love with you too, Quinn Anderson. I tried not to, but I cannot seem to help myself." The kiss that followed was sweet and tender, nothing like the perfunctory pecks Thomas had given her during their courtship. Quinn cradled her face in his hands like she was something precious, and when their lips met, it felt like coming home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right," he murmured. "I want to court you properly, ask your father's permission, give you the respect you deserve." "Then do it," Genevieve said, smiling against his lips. "Court me properly, Quinn Anderson. But know that my answer is already yes to any question you might eventually ask." The courtship that followed was everything Genevieve had never known she wanted. Quinn was attentive without being smothering, romantic without being frivolous. He would leave little notes for her at the mercantile, simple things like "thinking of you" or "you looked beautiful in that blue dress yesterday." He taught her to rope fence posts and helped her father repair the shed behind the house without being asked. He won over her mother by fixing the squeaky board on the front porch that had been driving Margaret crazy for months. Samuel Vaughn, initially suspicious of any man who showed interest in his daughter so soon after her broken engagement, gradually came to respect and then genuinely like Quinn. The young cowboy's honest nature and strong work ethic reminded Samuel of his own younger days, and he could see plainly how happy his daughter was. Summer melted into autumn, and the cottonwoods around Circleville turned brilliant shades of gold and orange. On a crisp October evening, Quinn came to the house dressed in his Sunday best, his hair neatly combed and his boots polished to a shine. Samuel invited him into the parlor while Genevieve pretended not to hover anxiously in the hallway. The conversation lasted nearly an hour, and when Quinn finally emerged, he was grinning from ear to ear. He found Genevieve in the kitchen and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "He said yes," Quinn announced, setting her down but keeping his arms around her waist. "Your father gave me his blessing. Genevieve Vaughn, will you do me the tremendous honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she said without hesitation, joy bubbling up inside her like champagne. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married in December, in the same church where Genevieve was supposed to have married Thomas. But this time, everything was different. This time, when she walked down the aisle in her mother's carefully preserved wedding gown, the man waiting for her at the altar looked at her like she hung the moon and stars. This time, when she spoke her vows, she meant every single word with her whole heart. The wedding was simple but beautiful, attended by friends and family who were genuinely happy for the couple. Mrs. Roberts wept through the entire ceremony, and even Mr. Roberts had to wipe his eyes when Quinn's voice broke with emotion as he promised to love and cherish his bride for all his days. The newlyweds spent their first months of marriage in a small house on the Double R Ranch that Mr. Roberts offered them at a generous rate. It was cozy rather than grand, but Genevieve loved every inch of it because it was theirs. She hung curtains she had sewn herself, arranged furniture that was a mixture of pieces from both their families, and planted a small garden in the front yard. Quinn continued working at the ranch, but he was also saving money with a dream of starting his own spread someday. Genevieve helped keep the books for the ranch, her neat handwriting and head for figures making her invaluable to Mr. Roberts. She also continued helping at her father's mercantile several days a week, enjoying the interaction with customers and the satisfaction of a job well done. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm, punctuated by moments of perfect happiness. There were morning kisses in the kitchen while coffee brewed on the stove, evenings spent reading aloud to each other while the fire crackled in the hearth, nights of passionate intimacy that left them both breathless and amazed. Their first real test as a couple came in late March of 1885, when a late spring blizzard swept through the valley with unexpected fury. Quinn and several other ranch hands were out on the range checking on cattle when the storm hit, and Genevieve spent 3 terror-filled days not knowing if her husband was alive or dead. When Quinn finally stumbled through the door, half frozen and exhausted, she burst into tears of relief and threw herself into his arms. They stayed locked together for a long moment, both trembling, before she hustled him toward the fire and began the process of warming him up. "I was so scared," she admitted as she wrapped him in blankets and pressed hot coffee into his hands. "I kept thinking about what my life would be like without you, and I could not bear it." "I am here," Quinn said, his voice rough from cold and exhaustion. "I am here, and I am not going anywhere. It takes more than a blizzard to keep me from coming home to you." That summer brought better news when Genevieve realized she was pregnant. She told Quinn on a warm July evening, catching him as he came in from work and pulling him down to sit beside her on the porch swing. "I have something to tell you," she said, unable to keep the smile from her face. "We are going to have a baby." For a moment Quinn just stared at her, his face going through a series of expressions too quick to identify. Then he let out a whoop of joy that probably scared the chickens, and gathered her into his arms with exquisite gentleness. "A baby," he kept repeating, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Genevieve bloomed under the combined attention of her husband, her mother, and Mrs. Roberts. Quinn became comically protective, trying to prevent her from doing anything more strenuous than sitting in a chair, until she finally had to tell him firmly that she was pregnant, not made of glass. Their son was born on a cold February morning in 1886, entering the world with a lusty cry that announced his presence to anyone within earshot. Quinn held the baby with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his tiny son. "What should we name him?" Genevieve asked, exhausted but radiant. They had discussed names endlessly over the previous months, but now that the moment was here, Quinn had a new idea. "What about Samuel, after your father, and we could call him Sam for short?" "Samuel Quinn Anderson," Genevieve said, testing out the name. "I love it." Little Sam was a happy baby who rarely fussed, blessed with his father's hazel eyes and his mother's dark hair. He was doted on by both sets of grandparents and by the entire crew at the Double R Ranch, who took turns carving him toys and teaching him to laugh. When Sam was 2 years old, Quinn came home one evening with news that made Genevieve gasp. Mr. Roberts was retiring and moving to California to be near his daughter, and he was offering to sell the Double R to Quinn at a price that was more than fair. "He said I have been like a son to him," Quinn explained, still looking dazed. "He said he would rather see the ranch go to someone he knows will take care of it than sell it to strangers." He took both of Genevieve's hands in his. "It is everything I have dreamed of, but it is a big decision." "What do you think?" "I think you should do it," Genevieve said firmly. "I think we should do it together. This is our chance to build something lasting, something we can pass on to Sam and any other children we might have." The negotiations took several months, but by the summer of 1888 the deal was complete. Quinn Anderson was now the owner of the Double R Ranch, and Genevieve was the rancher's wife. They moved into the main house, the same one where Mrs. Roberts had served her lemonade all those years ago, and Genevieve immediately began making it their own. Running a ranch was hard work, harder than anything either of them had done before. There were lean times and setbacks, sick cattle and broken fences and all the 100 other things that could go wrong. But they faced everything together, partners in every sense of the word. Their second child, a daughter they named Grace, was born in 1889. She had her mother's determination and her father's easy smile, and she wrapped them all around her tiny finger from day one. Sam adored his baby sister, appointing himself her protector and constant companion. As the years passed, The ranch prospered. Quinn's reputation as an honest dealer and skilled rancher spread, and they were able to expand their holdings. Genevieve proved to have a natural head for business, and she managed the financial side of things with the same capability she had once brought to her father's mercantile. Samuel Vaughn retired in 1892, selling the mercantile to a young couple from back east and moving into a smaller house near the ranch so he could spend more time with his grandchildren. Margaret took to ranch life with surprising enthusiasm, becoming famous in the area for her preserves and baked goods. One evening in the spring of 1895, 12 years after that fateful day when Genevieve had caught Thomas cheating, she and Quinn sat on the porch of their home watching the sun set over land that belonged to them. Sam was 11 now, a capable horseman who was already helping with the ranch work, and Grace was 6, a whirlwind of energy and questions. Both children were currently down at the barn with their grandfather, learning how to care for a new foal. "Do you ever think about how things might have been different?" Quinn asked, his arm around Genevieve's shoulders. "If you had not caught Thomas that day." Genevieve leaned into her husband's warmth, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and sage that always clung to him. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but only to feel grateful that I did catch him. Can you imagine if I had married him? I would have spent my whole life with the wrong man, never knowing what it felt like to be truly loved." "He was a damn fool," Quinn said, not for the first time. "Throwing away someone like you." "He did me a favor," Genevieve countered. "If he had not been a fool, I might never have ended up sitting on a bench outside the general store, being comforted by a cowboy who told me I deserved a faithful man." Quinn turned to look at her, his hazel eyes warm with the love that had only deepened over the years. "You do deserve a faithful man," he said seriously, "and I try every day to be worthy of you." "You are worthy," she said, reaching up to cup his weathered face in her palm. "You have always been worthy. You saved me, Quinn Anderson, not from Thomas but from a life half-lived. You showed me what real love looks like." "We saved each other," Quinn corrected gently. "I was just drifting before I met you, going through the motions. You gave me purpose, gave me a reason to build something lasting." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You gave me a home." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. In the distance, they could hear Sam's laughter and Grace's excited chatter as they played with the new foal. "I want another baby," Genevieve said suddenly, surprising herself as much as Quinn. "I know we said we were done after Grace, but I want one more." Quinn's face split into a grin. "Are you sure? You remember how exhausting babies are." "I am sure," she said, returning his smile. "I want our family to be complete." Their third child, another son they named William, was born in early 1896. He was a surprise baby in more ways than one, arriving 3 weeks early but healthy and strong. Sam and Grace were thrilled with their new baby brother, fighting over who got to hold him and help take care of him. The years continued to roll by, bringing changes and challenges, but also deep contentment. The Double R became one of the most successful ranches in the region, known for quality cattle and fair dealing. Sam grew into a fine young man who eventually took over much of the day-to-day operation of the ranch, allowing Quinn to slow down a bit as he got older. Grace surprised everyone by declaring that she wanted to become a teacher, and she went to normal school in Salt Lake City, returning to Circleville to teach at the very schoolhouse where her mother had once dreamed of sending children. She eventually married a local banker and gave Quinn and Genevieve their first grandchildren. William turned out to have a gift with horses, and he established a side business breeding and training horses that became almost as successful as the cattle operation. He married a spirited redhead from a neighboring ranch, And between the three Anderson children, Quinn and Genevieve eventually found themselves surrounded by 9 grandchildren. Thomas Henderson, for his part, had married the woman from the saloon and moved away from Circleville within a year of Genevieve breaking their engagement. Genevieve heard occasionally that they were unhappy, that Thomas had continued his philandering ways, but she felt nothing but pity for them both. That life could have been hers, and she thanked God regularly that it was not. On a warm afternoon in June of 1910, Quinn and Genevieve celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary with a party at the ranch. The whole family gathered, 3 generations of Andersons filling the house and yard with noise and laughter. There was music and dancing, food and stories, and the kind of joy that only comes from a life well lived surrounded by people you love. As the party wound down and the sun began to set, Quinn pulled Genevieve away from the crowd and led her to the same spot in the hills where he had first told her he loved her all those years ago. The climb was harder than it used to be, their bodies showing the wear of decades of hard work, but they made it eventually. "You remember the first time I brought you here?" Quinn asked, settling onto the grass and pulling Genevieve down beside him. "Of course I remember," she said, leaning against his shoulder. "You told me you were falling in love with me." "Best decision I ever made," Quinn said, pressing a kiss to her silver-streaked hair. "Telling you the truth, taking a chance. I could have stayed quiet, been the honorable gentleman, and kept my feelings to myself. But I am so glad I did not." "So am I," Genevieve agreed. "These 27 years have been the best of my life, even the hard parts because we faced them together." They watched the stars come out just as they had that first time, but now they were surrounded by the life they had built together. Down at the ranch house, their children and grandchildren were cleaning up after the party, their voices carrying on the evening breeze. It was a good life, Genevieve thought. Better than anything she could have imagined that terrible day in April of 1883 when her world had fallen apart. "Thank you," she said softly, turning to look at her husband's beloved face, weathered now with age but still dear to her. "For what?" Quinn asked, his hazel eyes questioning. "For being the faithful man I deserved," Genevieve said. "For showing me what real love looks like, for giving me this beautiful life." Quinn smiled, that same smile that had lit him up from within the first time they met, and kissed her with all the love and devotion of 27 years of marriage. "Thank you for saying yes," he murmured against her lips. "Thank you for taking a chance on a dusty cowboy who fell in love with you the moment he saw you on that bench." They stayed on the hill until the moon rose, silver and full, talking about the past and the future, about their children and grandchildren, about all the blessings they had been given. When they finally made their way back down to the ranch house, walking slowly hand in hand, they could see lights burning in the windows, welcoming them home. Inside, Sam had convinced everyone to stay for coffee and pie, and the party picked up a second wind. Little hands grabbed at their grandparents, pulling them into games and demanding stories. Quinn lifted his youngest grandson onto his shoulders while Genevieve found herself surrounded by granddaughters wanting to braid her hair. Later that night, after everyone had finally gone home or settled into guest rooms, Quinn and Genevieve lay in their bed listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch at night. The house creaked as it cooled, an owl hooted somewhere outside, and from down the hall came the soft sound of William's youngest crying briefly before being soothed back to sleep. "This is everything I never knew I wanted," Genevieve whispered into the darkness. "When I was a girl, I thought happiness was a nice house and a respectable husband and children who minded their manners. But this is so much more than that. This is real and messy and sometimes difficult, but it is full of love. We have been blessed," Quinn agreed, pulling her closer. Every single day with you has been a blessing. As Genevieve drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, she thought about the strange paths life could take. If Thomas had been faithful, if Quinn had not been there that day to catch her when she stumbled, if she had not had the courage to open her heart to love again so soon, everything would have been different. She would have missed out on this beautiful, chaotic, perfect life. But Thomas had been faithless and Quinn had been there, and she had been brave enough to recognize true love when it was offered to her. And that, she thought as sleep claimed her, had made all the difference. The years continued their steady march forward. Quinn and Genevieve grew old together, their hair turning silver and their bodies slowing down, but their love never dimming. They watched their children raise families of their own, passing on the values of hard work, honesty, and devotion that had been the foundation of their own marriage. The Double R Ranch continued to thrive under Sam's management, and it became a place where the whole extended family gathered for holidays and celebrations. The big house that had once seemed so grand to Genevieve was filled with the sound of children's laughter, the smell of Margaret's recipes being recreated by a new generation, and the warmth of family love. On Quinn's 70th birthday in 1926, the entire family gathered once again for a celebration that spanned 3 days. All 9 grandchildren were there, along with 4 great-grandchildren, the oldest of their grandchildren having started families of their own. Quinn held court from his rocking chair on the porch, telling stories of the old days and dispensing wisdom to anyone who would listen. Genevieve watched him from the doorway, her heart full to bursting. This man who had offered her kindness when she needed it most, who had loved her faithfully through 43 years of marriage, who had given her a life beyond her wildest dreams. He caught her looking and winked, that roguish charm still present even at 70. "Come here, wife," he called out, patting the chair beside him. "Sit with your old cowboy." She crossed the porch and settled into the chair, taking his hand in hers. Their fingers intertwined automatically, the gesture as natural as breathing after all these years. Around them, their family laughed and talked and celebrated, but in that moment, it was just the two of them, the way it had always been at the core of everything. "No regrets?" Quinn asked softly, a question he had asked her many times over the years. "Not a single one," Genevieve answered, the same response she always gave because it was true. "You, Quinn Anderson, were the best thing that ever happened to me." "Second best," he corrected with a smile. "The best thing was you having the courage to walk away from what was wrong and toward what was right." They sat together as the celebration continued around them, watching their legacy play out in the children and grandchildren who carried their values forward into a new era. The world was changing rapidly, automobiles replacing horses and electricity coming even to remote ranches like theirs, but some things remained constant. Love, family, faithfulness, these things did not change. As the sun set on that perfect day, painting the Utah sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Quinn leaned over and kissed his wife with the same tenderness he had shown her on their wedding day 43 years earlier. And Genevieve kissed him back, grateful every single day for the cowboy who had told a heartbroken woman that she deserved a faithful man, and then spent the rest of his life proving it to her. Their story was not one of grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but rather one of steady devotion, daily choice, and the profound power of faithful love. And in the end, that was the best kind of love story there was.